"Salute me," the man said, "and there's more in it for you than you make in a year." I had stood the interior post at a great many state functions, and I can tell you that I had been offered a number of things across those years. Drinks, bribes, a woman's phone number once, folded into my glove by a guest who thought the whole uniform was a costume rented for her amusement. But I had never, until that night, been offered a year's wages to bend at the waist for a man who had decided the room belonged to him. He was a financier, one of those names that appears on buildings and on the side of foundations, a man whose wealth had reached the size where it stops being money and becomes a kind of weather that the people around him are expected to live inside. He had come to the diplomatic reception in the long gallery as a guest of the trade delegation, and from the moment he entered, he had moved through the evening the way such men do, leaving a wake of people adjusting themselves to his presence. I watched him for an hour before he ever spoke to me, because watching the room is the post, and I had learned long ago that the man who is going to be trouble announces himself well before he reaches you. He reached me near the foot of the grand stair, where I stood my post in full ceremonial kit, red tunic, bearskin, white gloves, the rifle at my side, eyes forward. He had a glass in one hand and an audience of 3 or 4 hangers-on at his shoulder, and he had clearly decided, somewhere in the course of the champagne, that the immovable guardsman at the stair would make an amusing demonstration of something for his little court. "You there," he said. "Guardsman, do you know who I am?" I did not answer. A guard on his post does not chat with the guests, and besides, the question is never really a question. It is a man telling you that he believes the answer should change how you treat him. "I'll take that as no," he said, to a small laugh from his people. "Let me help you. I am the reason half the men in this room have jobs. I have given more to this country's institutions than your entire regiment will cost in 100 years. He stepped closer. "So here is what's going to happen. You're going to give me a proper salute, a good one, for the cameras, and I'm going to put something in your pocket that'll make your whole month. Everybody wins." I kept my eyes forward and said nothing, which he took, as men like him always take silence, for the opening move in a negotiation. He named a figure. It was, in fact, more than I make in a year. His people made the appreciative sounds people make around that much money. He waited, smiling certain, utterly certain, because in his experience the only reason a man ever refused a number was to be offered a larger one, and he had more numbers than I could ever have refusals. I want to be fair to him, because contempt is easy and accuracy is better. He was not, I think, a cruel man by the ordinary measure. He was something that money makes more often than cruelty. A man who had simply never, in his adult life, encountered a thing he could not buy, and had therefore concluded that the unbuyable did not exist. He looked at my uniform and saw a price he hadn't named yet. He could not have told you why that was the most insulting thing anyone said to me all year, because he genuinely did not know there was anything in the uniform to insult. When I still did not move, his smile thinned, and he made his mistake. He reached out and tapped the brass buttons on my chest with 2 fingers, proprietary, the way you'd tap a vending machine that had taken your coin. And he said, "Lower, for me and not for his court. I can have this post reassigned with 1 phone call. I can make tonight the last night you wear that ridiculous hat. Salute me." There is a thing that happens when a man threatens you on your post that the threatener never expects. The fear he is reaching for does not arrive. I had stood this stair through state visits and false alarms, and one night that I am not permitted to discuss. I had worn this uniform in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a financier's wounded vanity. His phone call did not frighten me, and his money did not tempt me, and his 2 fingers on my buttons did not move me, and the absence of all 3 left a great and sudden quiet in which I was finally, by the rules of my post, permitted to speak, because a guest laying hands on a guardsman and issuing threats is no longer ordinary chatter, and a guard may answer what he must. I turned my head the small precise degree required to look at him directly, and I spoke once, quietly, courteously, so that only he and the few nearest could hear. "Sir," I said, "you have mistaken what this uniform is for. I do not salute the men who pay for the building. I salute the things the building is meant to stand for. You cannot afford those, and neither can I. We can only serve them." Step back from my post. That was all of it. I did not raise my voice. I did not touch him. I returned my eyes to the front and stood as I had stood for the hour before, and I let the sentence do what a true sentence does in a quiet room, which is travel. It traveled. The few who had heard it went still, and then the stillness moved outward through his little court the way cold moves, through water, and I watched, in the edge of my vision because my eyes were forward, the smile go out of the man's face like a light switched off, at the wall. He had come to the stair to make me small in front of his people, and instead he was standing in a widening circle of guests who had all, suddenly found something else to look at, and who would all, by morning, be telling the story of the night the great financier offered a king's guard a year's wages and was told, courteously, that there were things his money could not reach. He stood there a moment longer. I think he was searching, with real effort, for the larger number that had always worked before, and finding, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, that the latter had no next rung. There was no figure that answered what I had said, and some part of him, I will give him this, understood it. He set his glass down on the tray of a passing steward, and he turned, and he walked away from my post without another word, his court trailing after him in an embarrassed silence that was louder than anything he had said. A while later, when the room had reassembled itself around the space the man left, an older guest came and stood near my post, not in front of it, just near, the way people stand near a fire. He had the look of someone who had served long ago. There is a way such men carry their shoulders that the service never quite takes back. He did not try to talk to me, which I appreciated. He stood a moment looking out at the bright gallery, and then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, 30 years I came to rooms like this and watched men buy everything in them. He let that sit. First time I ever saw one of them walk up to a thing he couldn't. Then he inclined his head a fraction, the small salute of one quiet man to another, and went back to the party. I kept my eyes forward. But I have carried that nod a good deal longer than I have carried anything, the financier said to me. He left the reception within the half hour. I heard later that he did, in fact, make a telephone call, not to have me reassigned, but to a man on the household staff he knew, asking almost sheepishly what the guardsman at the stair had meant. The household man, who has more polish than I will ever have, told him that it meant exactly what it had sounded like, and that the guard had been courteous in the saying of it, which was more than the occasion had strictly required. I was not reassigned. My colonel heard the account from 3 different guests before he heard it from me, and when he finally did ask me about it, all he said was, "And did you keep your eyes forward when you said it?" I told him I had. He said, "Good," and that was the whole of the matter, because in my regiment the eyes forward is the point, and the line I'd spoken was only true because I had not moved an inch to deliver it. I have turned that night over more than once since. I do not think the financier was a villain. I think he was a man who had been told his whole life that everything has a price, and had built an entire self on the belief, and had walked up to a stair one night and met the one thing that doesn't. Not in me particularly, but in the thing I was standing for, which is older than his money and will be standing after it. He offered me more than I make in a year to bow to him. What he never understood is that I was already serving something I would have stood there all night for, in the cold, for nothing, and counted myself well paid. That is the uniform he mistook for a costume. You cannot buy the men who understand what it means. You can only stand near them for a moment at the foot of a stair and find out, too late, and in front of everyone, that there was something in the world your money was never going to reach.